Leech Collector. In medieval times, leech collectors played an essential role in the practice of bloodletting, a common medical treatment believed to cure a variety of ailments by draining bad blood, which, in accordance to the medical theory of humorism, was supposed to balance the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and therefore cure the illness. Doctors, or barber surgeons, used leeches to perform this procedure, and collectors were responsible for gathering the leeches from freshwater ponds, swamps, and marshes. Leech collectors typically waded into bogs or marshes barefoot and allowed the leeches to latch onto their skin. Once enough leeches had attached, they would carefully remove the leeches and store them in containers to be sold to medical practitioners. This process was physically unpleasant, dangerous, and involved significant health risks due to numerous bites that could easily get infected in the murky waters. Although the job was not pleasant, it allowed a certain level of financial security, as the lifespan of a captive leech and the limit of its uses was fairly short, ensuring a consistent demand for them, based on the level of weirdness, danger, social perception, and how disgusting the job was. Leech collecting gets the score of 3 out of 5 on the scale of how much it sucked. Gong Farmer. A gong farmer, also known as a night soil collector, had one of the dirtiest and most revolting jobs in medieval society. They were responsible for cleaning out human waste from cesspits and latrines, which were often built near homes or communal areas. The job usually took place at night, when the streets were less busy, allowing them to transport the waste discreetly. Gong farmers would descend into cesspits to dig out the human waste, using buckets and shovels to remove the waste and transport it out of the city or village. They sometimes used carts to carry the waste to fields where it would be dumped or used as fertilizer. The job required manual labor in highly unsanitary conditions, often exposing workers to foul odors and disease. Gong farmers did not deal in human waste only. They often doubled as garbage collectors, and sometimes even corpse carriers. As bad as the job was, gong farmers were well paid for their labor. Therefore, gong farming gets a charming 3.5 out of 5 on a scale of how much it sucked. Executioner. An executioner was responsible for carrying out death sentences, often by beheading, hanging, or using more gruesome methods, such as drawing and quartering or burning at the stake. Their role was vital to maintaining law and order, but it came with a significant social stigma due to the nature of their work. Executioners typically carried out sentences passed down by the local justice system, whether from a lord, king, or the church. They needed to be precise and efficient, especially with beheadings, as a botched execution could lead to severe public backlash. Executioners also handled the disposal of bodies, and sometimes performed tortures to extract confessions before the execution. The job had a lot of social stigma associated with it and involved close contact with human bodily fluids, warranting an overall score of 2.5 out of 5 on the how much it sucked scale. Tanner. A tanner was responsible for turning animal hides into leather, a vital material for making clothing, shoes, armor, and more in medieval society. The tanning process was notoriously foul-smelling and involved soaking hides in vats of urine, water, lime, and other harsh chemicals, followed by scraping off flesh, fat, and hair from the hides. The hides were then treated with tannin, a chemical derived from oak bark which preserved the leather. The process took weeks and required constant exposure to rancid smells and decaying animal flesh. Tanneries were often located on the outskirts of towns due to the overwhelming stench which lingered on the workers for long periods of time. Therefore, the job of being a tanner gets the score of 1.75 out of 5. Rat catcher. A rat catcher was responsible for controlling rat populations in medieval towns and cities, where poor sanitation led to infestations. This job became especially crucial during outbreaks of disease, or most famously, the Black Death, as rats were the primary carriers of the fleas that transmitted the disease. Rat catchers used traps, poisons, and trained animals like dogs or ferrets, and in some cases caught rats by hand. Their work often took them to sewers, garbage heaps, and other filthy areas where rats were most prevalent. Despite their role in public health, rat catchers worked in unsanitary and dangerous conditions, coming into direct contact with diseased and feral rodents. Due to that, the rat catcher gets a score of 1.5 out of 5. Fuller. A fuller was responsible for cleaning and thickening woolen cloth, which was a vital process in medieval textile production. The fulling process removed grease, dirt, and natural oils from the wool, making the fabric softer and more durable. To achieve this, fullers used a method of soaking the cloth in stale urine to remove impurities and then trampling on it to work the liquid into the fabric. The entire process was labor-intensive and took place in filthy, smelly environments. Fullers' workshops were usually located on the outskirts of towns due to the overwhelming stench of ammonia and decaying waste. The smell of urine and ammonia was not easy to wash off of clothes and skin, therefore, the fuller gets a score of 1.5 out of 5 on the scale of how much it sucked to be one. Whipping boy. A whipping boy was a young servant in medieval and early modern courts who was punished in place of a young prince or noble child. The logic behind this practice was that because the prince or noble was of such high status, it was considered improper to physically punish them. Instead, the whipping boy would bear the brunt of the punishment, with the expectation that the noble would feel guilty about their friend suffering and modify their behavior. Whipping boys were often educated alongside the noble child, forming a close bond with them. When the noble misbehaved or failed in their studies, the whipping boy would be punished in their place, typically through flogging. The idea was that the prince or noble would be so emotionally attached to the whipping boy that they would be deterred from misbehaving again. However, this wasn't always the case, and many whipping boys suffered frequently without any real impact on the behavior of the child they were meant to correct. Although often punished in the stead of their lords, a whipping boy had a unique chance for education and could drastically improve his living situation. There was little to no stigma to the job, but the punishments, depending on the noble family they served, could be very severe, and due to that, a whipping boy gets a score of 1.25 out of 5. Gravedigger. A gravedigger was responsible for burying the dead, a job that became particularly important and demanding during periods of high mortality, such as during wars, winters, or plagues like the Black Death. It was at times of such crises when the job elevated from being unpleasant and socially stigmatizing to becoming seriously dangerous for the gravedigger. The job required physical endurance, as the ground was sometimes hard to break, particularly during winter. Gravediggers worked in all weather conditions and at all hours, working day and night if necessary to manage the large number of bodies. The work exposed them to decaying corpses and the potential for disease transmission. They often handled bodies covered in shrouds, sometimes long after decomposition had started, which only added to the risk. Often unappreciated and stigmatized, the gravedigger gets a score of 3 out of 5 on the scale of how bad it was to be one. Sin Eater. A sin eater was a person who, in medieval folklore, was believed to consume the sins of the deceased by eating ritual food placed on or near the body. This strange and morbid practice was thought to absolve the dead of their sins, allowing them to pass into the afterlife without spiritual burden. When someone died, the family would prepare a meal, often bread or ale, and place it on the chest or near the corpse of the deceased. The sin eater would then consume the food, symbolically taking on the sins of the dead person. Sin eaters were outcasts, paid for their service in food or coin. The job was highly stigmatized because it was believed that due to them willingly taking the sin of others, they would attract evil and misfortune to the household if staying long enough. Due to extreme social stigma, the sin eater gets a score of 2.5 out of 5. Groom of the Stool. The Groom of the Stool was a highly unusual yet prestigious position in the English royal court. This personal servant was responsible for assisting the king with his bodily functions, particularly helping him during toilet visits. Despite the intimate and somewhat degrading nature of the role, the Groom of the Stool became a trusted confidant of the king, often holding great influence and access to the monarch. The Groom of the Stool's primary duty was to attend to the king when he needed to relieve himself, managing the portable stool, and ensuring the monarch was clean and comfortable. This included handling the king's personal hygiene after he finished using the toilet. While this task seems humiliating, the position gave the groom significant proximity to the king, which often led to political and personal influence at court, warranting a score of 1.5 out of 5 on the how much it sucked scale. Barber Surgeon. Well, Barber Surgeon was a medieval medical practitioner responsible for performing minor surgeries, bloodletting, and other basic medical procedures. Originally, barbers were tasked with cutting hair and trimming beards, but because of their access to sharp tools, they took on surgical roles, making them the primary source of medical care for the general population. Barber surgeons performed a wide range of services, from cutting hair and shaving beards to extracting teeth, lancing boils, setting bones, and even amputating limbs. They used crude and unsanitary instruments, often without anesthesia, which made surgeries extremely painful and dangerous. While some barber surgeons had formal apprenticeships, many were self-taught and lacked the medical knowledge of physicians. The job was not usually dangerous for the barber, although they were at risk of infections, contamination, and injury. Therefore, it gets a comfortable 1 out of 5 on the how much it sucked scale. Urine Diver. A urine diver was tasked with collecting human urine for various industrial uses in medieval times. Urine was a valuable commodity due to its ammonia content, which was used for fulling cloth and wool, as well as producing saltpeter, a key ingredient in gunpowder. Urine divers would collect urine from public latrines, chamber pots, or cesspits, often diving into these waste-filled areas to extract as much as possible. The job was highly unsanitary, and divers had to wade through and handle large amounts of waste on a daily basis. Gong farmers often took on roles of freelance urine divers, delivering their ammonia-smelling spoils to whomever was buying. Therefore, they get a self-explanatory 3.5 out of 5 on the scale. And now for the top 3, or in this case, top 6 worst jobs a medieval person could have. For the first place, Gong Farmer and the Urine Diver. For the second spot, the Leech Collector and the Gravedigger. And lastly, for the third place, the Executioner and the Sin Eater. Thank you all for watching. Let me know in the comments if you made it to the end. As always, I appreciate you being here and wish you all the best. See you soon.